Welcome to Pearced Off, the counter-apologetics and philosophy segment from myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, for the Skepticule Podcast. And today I am going to talk about Islam again. I've talked before about what I believe is the violence inherent in Islam and the problems that the world faces with regard to trying to solve what I see as the problem of a violent and prevalent religion in the world. Now, I've been quite outspoken in recent times in what I believe to be a necessary and inescapable connection between Islam as properly understood. And yeah, I know that notion is arguable and is wrought with issue. But there is this connection between Islam as properly understood and violence and intolerance. I've debated this publicly and given public talks on this. And I want to say that I stand by my claims completely. I've written how Christianity and Islam have core differences which allow the holy books to be interpreted in different sort of paradigms, allowing for more ability and rationale for cherry picking concerning the Bible and less with the Quran. So I've talked about that before, about how the provenance of those holy books means that your layers of interpretation are very different with the different religions. And I've also written about how if one uses the Quran and the role model of Muhammad as guidance, and not to mention the Hadith, then you cannot get away from the fact that Islam has at its very foundations violence and morality that is a far cry from the morality understood in modern morally progressive societies. And as I said, my views on these points are the same. I don't want to particularly repeat the rationale for that. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that is the case. Now, the most vociferous of my critics, when I talk about these issues, have been my fellow liberals. Now, as a liberal philosopher of religion myself, I've claimed that extremist violence is understandably and inexplicably linked to the Quran and Muhammad and Hadith, and that the problem is largely insoluble because you can't simply drop these things or explain them away, certainly in a way that you can do this with the mere inspired word of God in the Old Testament, for example. My liberal critics often take the position that violent jihadis are not representative of the, scare quotes, true Islam that happens to be, for example, peace-loving. I contest this and claim that more likely they are suffering from implicit egotism bias. This is a term that I've made up myself, implicit egotism bias, where say, for example, you are a liberal who sees everyone else in eyes of yourself. So you think, I'm morally progressive, so when I look at others, I look for the morally progressive in them. So when I look at Islam as a whole, I more closely associate myself with the morally progressive liberal Muslims, and therefore I think that they represent Islam. And there's a bit of a fallacious step there by making a hasty generalization on the best case scenario, because that best case scenario best represents me. And we see egotism biases all over the shop in our daily lives and in all other spheres of life. And I've applied that here to how many liberals look at Islam and then say, well, you know, the jihadis are just ruining Islam. They're not the proper true Muslims. The peace-loving ones are the true Muslims. But actually, that's not based on an interpretation of the Quran or any kind of exegesis, but it's based on the fact that you yourself are liberal and therefore you're associating better with those liberal Muslims. And what true Islam is, if there were such a thing to properly exist, is what this debate is about. But you cannot deny those who claim that they are doing these horrible acts in the name of Islam, and that they really aren't. That another more peaceable version really is the correct interpretation, especially, and this has happened a lot, when you haven't even read the Quran or looked into the history of Muhammad. So I've read the Quran at least, and so when I say these things, I find it quite incredible when my fellow liberals really vehemently disagree with me, but they actually haven't read the Quran themselves and done any kind of work towards understanding what the Quran means. They're just looking, I'd say, incorrectly at the liberal Muslims and saying that they best represent Islam. But here's the thing. I think strongly that I'm correct in this, right? However, I also think that this position is problematic for finding a short and possibly long-term solution to the problem of religious fundamentalism, terrorism, and moral atrocity which exists throughout the world under the banner of Islam. By pointing out the truth, I think that I'm also helping to alienate the very people we should be celebrating What I mean by this is that we should prefer the liberal Muslims over the more fundamentalist ones for obvious moral reasons. These, though, under my claims, are less correct in their theological interpretations than the fundamentalists who we are trying to argue against. But by pointing out the theological soundness that the jihadis arguably have, is to pit the Western world and fellow non-Muslims against all of Islam, as the liberal Muslims get tarred with the same brush and Islamophobia runs rife. I believe we should be afraid of Islam as a theological, Quranic, hadith-driven and Mohammedan worldview because it fosters violence. Death is the answer for every wrongdoing in the Quran, as dictated by God immutably. But pointing this truth out is potentially damaging between the worlds of non-Muslims and the wider branches of descriptively labelled Muslims, liberals and all. In other words, I'm saying that it is possibly worth shelving the truth in favour of social cohesion and finding some sort of solution to the problems faced in the modern world. This is a moral dilemma seen in terms of consequentialism, that truth has extrinsic value here. So value that's outside of itself, that we find the value of truth in perhaps whether it gives us greater goodness outside of whether it's true or not. If it causes or maintains problems, for example, then it can have negative moral value. So here I'm saying that the truth that Islam is inherently violent is a truth that actually causes more problems, certainly in the short term, than good that it does by point of fact of being the truth about the world. So going around talking about the danger of Islam as I have, as true as this might be, is dangerous. It endangers solving these issues of the problems of Islam itself, if you will. So I'm condemning the liberal Muslims through guilt by association, to whom we should be so strongly appealing in order to pave a cohesive way out of this political, social and theological mire. Perhaps I'm therefore saying it is worth me stepping back from the Islamic debate in order to reassess that my public condemnation of the religion, although it may well be true, and I think it is definitely true, is actually more damaging to finding a solution to the problems we face. Therefore, I suppose to boil it down to a very simple point, is there ever a case that burying the truth can be a good thing? So, discuss. As ever, question everything and drop by my blog